Let's talk about transformation, shall we? Now, there's a concept that I recently learned about, and this is a concept called learned helplessness. And learned helplessness, let me just start by stating that it's one of the main reasons why people never take steps towards transformative change. In very many organizations, it's one of the reasons why so many remain stuck in certain repetitive cycles, because those in charge exploit the learned helplessness of those above them to basically maintain status quo. Nations remain in this repetitive cycle of oppression, and it's like oppression, elect, oppression, shout, elect, oppression. Like this state of learned helplessness is the reason why so many countries are stuck. And I'll talk about it from the perspective of, like, you look at African countries. Let me use Kenya, because Kenya is one of the most recently emerging countries with this particular state of being, and it is among the leading countries when it comes to revolutions, because you keep hearing that there's an uprising. However, for Kenya, it's a very unique. Kenya is a very unique country, and for very many reasons. And one of the reasons that I feel Kenya is a very unique country, that it should not be hindered by learned helplessness, is because you just look at Kenya, for example. I was watching videos of LNN, Lin Ngugi television network, and LNN is doing an amazing job. Like the one shout out that I'll give to them is for covering whatever has been happening from June last year in 2024 up until now. And they have not it's the one media station that has not let learned helplessness to hinder them from covering whatever is happening, or to stop them from literally informing the public about what's going on. However, I saw the coverage that they did when in June, actually, when we had the first protest, June 25th. Then we had the second protest on Sabasaba, and they did such a nice coverage of how Nairobi streets were looking like before the police arrived and after the police arrived. And it's so interesting that this reality of learned helplessness was so prominent, like where politicians are speaking and they are the ones in charge, but they're talking as though there's nothing they can do simply because you've been put in this state of helplessness so much and so long that you've gotten used to hearing the voice in your head tell you there's nothing you can do. And I couldn't help but think about Cameroonians and Zimbabweans. The reason as to why Paul Biya has been in power for this long is because the people of Cameroon have adopted this learned helplessness. The reason as to why Mugabe was able to rule Zimbabwe for so long, and the reason why even the current president Mnangagwa is able to stay in power that much, and Uganda to be able to just accept things as they are. They even make jokes about it. They say, we even know our president in 2034. It's because of learned helplessness. The difference with Kenyans is that Kenyans do not easily accept learned helplessness because they know that there's something that they can do about it, and they literally do something about it. In Southern Africa, I've lived here for like 2 years, and I see how much people have just embraced learned helplessness. That people know what's supposed to be done, but they just don't take a step towards doing it. And then it begs the question, why do we allow it to allow certain circumstances to just remain as they have been for the longest time? And this learned helplessness is psychological, because your mind gets to a point where you just accept mediocrity as your normal way of life and the way of being. And that's problematic, because it doesn't enable you to actually take very critical steps towards transforming your life or transforming the life of your community. And this learned helplessness can be countered if we start taking small steps towards taking charge of our own lives and our own well-being. And this starts at the level of grassroots. So for example, right now, predominantly in Kenya, you hear this whole narrative about there's nothing we can do about the police brutality. We know what needs to be done. We do. Police brutality has been there for long. We know. First, I was just listening to Mwafrika on Ikonini Ikonini podcast, and I love what he said. He said the people in charge, the people at the top of the food chain, they have one thing in common: business interests. If you just did it for your business interests, actually that would be better. Who decided that there are only two things a police officer can get: a gun or a stick? It's not even a stick, actually. In mpini maze, it's that stick that you put in a digging hole. Instead of using it for digging and farming and agriculture, we are arming our police officers. We even used to call it FFU, fanya fujo uone. Back in the 90s it was bad. 90s, 80s, FFU, what we know it now as GSU used to be FFU. Fanya fujo uone. GSU, they even generalized it and just said General Service Unit, because they felt helpless to transform what used to be a colonial strategy to beat down people until they feel so unable to function or think critically, that this colonial system of choice for how to disable or to de-escalate a situation is you bring violence to an already volatile situation. Helplessness that is learned. Okay, they can literally buy tasers. Ruto can actually decide to do business, and as he has been doing, go order tasers. Instead of asking the police to shoot people in the legs, order tasers and just make sure that the electrical voltage is the type that is made in China. It's cheap, but you can inflate it, as you always do, because that's normal for the political class to inflate prices for basic things. A pen will cost $1 million in the country, in a country where people are struggling to make ends meet. Now, learned helplessness is the reason why, for example, recently we've had this story of a hero, girls, at a school where entire boards become dysfunctional simply because no one has the audacity to challenge the prevalent mediocrity, as long as it seems better than where the organization was in the past. You know, boards of directors are unable to do anything meaningful to transform an institution, just because they are feeling so helpless, and you can hear it in the tone that they speak. Decision makers talking as though there's really nothing that they can do about it. I was reading that article on Airo, and it was so funny that former principals of the school could do nothing. The school chaplain speaking as though there's really nothing that she could have done in the past. The school board talking as though there was nothing they could have done. Fellow teachers, colleagues in such a prestigious institution, they couldn't do anything because they had learned to be helpless. When institutional agencies are getting to a point where they feel like there's really nothing that they can do, then what you see is mediocrity that is accepted, where standards of excellence are no longer upheld. But excellence is what we should be chasing every now and then to be able to advance civilization. We were created to move the needle towards the glorious civilization that we are destined for. But because of this learned helplessness, we are unable to even move an inch towards it. And that's why we are stuck in these cycles. We are not learning because we in some communities we are stuck saying we are in a learning mode. What have you learned so far? You must have learned to do something at least. Have you learned how to do basics in order for you to say we are in a learning mode? We call conferences and seminars, we call for meetings to discuss progress, but we do not move because we've learned to be helpless, and most of the time even basic things beat us. Basic things like, if you just did what you were supposed to do, a lot would change in your workplace, in your school as a student, in your churches, in your religious institutions, in your Baha'i centers if you are a Baha'i, in your mosques if you are a Muslim, in your temples if you are a Hindu, in your synagogues if you are a Jew. If we didn't learn to be helpless, we would actually move so much. All the manifestations of God, all the prophets of God, if Jesus was helpless, I don't think Christianity would exist today. If Muhammad was acting helpless, I don't think Islam would be surviving today. If Baha'u'llah was acting helpless like we do sometimes, I don't think the Baha'i faith would have become one of the most fast advancing religions in the world today if he had been helpless. And in his writings he actually stipulates that you should not just be satisfied with the mere the basics of things. You should be striving for excellence, Baha'i excellence. If we lived according to the standards of excellence of Christianity, our nations would be very far. If we lived like Muslims actually try because when you look at Dubai, you see Islamic standards. You look at China is predominantly Buddhist. Buddhism is not considered a religion, but it is actually a religion. But because of our ignorance, again, we are helpless. We don't even want to learn, yet the internet is there for us. We are living at a time when we have such an abundance of resources, but we are not using it because of our learned helplessness. Children are languishing in ignorance because we are acting helpless. You look at I travel, like, in today's world, there's technology that enables you to actually visit a country without necessarily going there. And travel is one of the biggest enemies of ignorance. Where, like, if you sit in your living room and you have a phone, just do virtual tour, do a search of virtual tour of any country of your interest, and you will see so much. Shenzhen, China, the Silicon Valley of the East, they're not acting helpless. That's why they're the ones building our roads, because we keep acting helpless. All our infrastructure is being built by the Chinese. Now in Zambia, people are acting so helpless that standards of excellence are non-existent, because you literally, an example is, you go to a bank, you leave your house and you go to the bank, it's a whole day. Instead of the bank coming to you, you have to go to the bank to make a transaction. And so something that you could have spent 10 minutes on in the comfort of your home, you end up spending an entire day, because the infrastructure is wanting for you to go there. The travel time that it takes, it will take you half a day. By the time you're coming back home at night. That's time that could have been spent productively in something else, in other endeavors. Standards of excellence. We keep acting helpless. We feel like we can't do anything about anything. Learned helplessness is all in the head. Now, on a personal level, we are all believers one way or another. Even an atheist is one of the greatest believers, and I know that from watching Mafrika and that guy, the chairman of the Atheist Society in Kenya. And every time I hear him talk, I believe that guy has such a strong belief in whatever he says. Let me actually look him up. His name is, in Kenya, I think Mumia or something like that. Chairman Harrison Mumia. Yes, Harrison Mumia. Every time I listen to Harrison Mumia, I think he's a greater believer than some of the bishops and clerics that we know. Because that guy, he doesn't believe in sky god, he doesn't believe in sky daddy up there. He believes that humans were made to advance civilization. And that's why some of the legislation that we have in Kenya, when it comes to human rights, are championed by atheists rather than religious people. Religious people are creating problems out here, man. Because our standards of I'm a religious person. I'm a believer, and sometimes I feel like our belief in learned helplessness is what stops us from achieving the levels of excellence that our religious books preach. Because when you read the Bible, nothing short of excellence. When you read the Quran, nothing short of excellence. Look at the mosques, the standards that Muhammad put for how mosques should look like. Excellence, very high standards. You read about the standards that Baha'u'llah puts for houses of worship. Man, it's not average things. It's supposed to be the highest levels of perfection in the possible that we can achieve. You look at the Hindu temples, standards of excellence. We just forget to bring that standard of excellence to our ordinary lives because of our learned helplessness. We are unable to change the world, yet it's a possibility we can actually change the world, but we need to just start at the level of, your local level. And in fact, I'm a firm believer that you should actually start transforming communities by transforming your home first. Start at home. Hold your children to the highest standards of excellence. You're a teacher. Hold your students to the highest standards of excellence. Not just mediocrity, because we can't move the needle of civilization if we just accept anything, the bare minimum. We just accept mediocrity just because we are helpless. But helplessness that we put on ourselves. We are struggling on personal levels because we are scared to even hold each other accountable. We can't even speak to each other and say, bro, I feel like you can do this. And I feel like, sis, I know you are capable of doing more than this. Because of our own helplessness, we can't even hold the criminals in our communities accountable. We are helpless because we can't hold those people who we know are committing atrocities in our villages, in our neighborhoods. We can't even hold those who are in our religious communities accountable because we are acting helpless. In your office, you know who is stealing. Leaders are a micro representation of who we are as citizens. You know who the thief is, but then you're focusing on that politician who is stealing instead of focusing on that guy who is actually stealing resources that should go to some charity to help children. We are scared to hold leaders accountable. Like, I am a president, for example. I am a president, and I know my fellow president is creating havoc in their own country, which is my neighbor or neighbor of my neighbor. But we are scared to tell them the truth. We are scared to call them out on the shenanigans that they are carrying out because we have learned to be helpless. Baha'u'llah actually says that world peace, the initial stages of world peace, the lesser peace, will come when, let's say, a leader of a country decides to create havoc in the world like it is happening now. That we will attain that peace when nations arise to counter that one cause of problems. But right now, instead of world leaders actually holding fellow world leaders accountable, they are supporting them in their madness because we are acting helpless. We have elevated the levels of helplessness to some crazy levels. We have treated this helplessness that we brought upon ourselves as something that we can't do. Organizations are crumbling. Startups are falling apart because those who could have held the leadership of the startup accountable are scared. They don't want to. So we can change this if we wanted. The world can actually change. I was watching someone say the world can change tomorrow if we wanted. But for now, we don't want because we are acting helpless. we have learned to be helpless. Kwani iko nini maze?